Hey folks, if there is one specific type of content that I've really enjoyed making over the year just past, it'd be my world lore videos. I absolutely adore exploring old ruins found across the kingdom of Hyrule, speculating on abandoned settlements and just diving deeper into the raw lore of the world in Zelda games. I made quite a few throughout the year just past focused on the newest game Tears of the Kingdom, which dropped back in May 2023, and in today's video I've put together the pure content sections of all of those videos to create a big marathon of Zelda World Lore content. You really seem to have enjoyed them, so from mysterious ruins found in the wild to speculation on what old Zonai remains were back in the day, I present to you a big old marathon of fascinating Zelda ruins and their world lore. Sit back, feel free to clean, study, fall asleep, or just chill to this long video, and as always folks, be sure to go and grab yourself a snack and or drink, and let's get into this one. Starting off by Solari Plain, we find this now empty ring of trees. There is a main path leading straight through it, but for seemingly no reason other than for navigation. But to where exactly? If you haven't played Breath of the Wild, then this spot may look rather normal to you. However, if you have, then you'll know that this was formerly the site of the Serene Stable, one of the most beautiful stable locations of that time frame, and a waypoint between the venture from central Hyrule to the Hebra region. A good few years down the line, now in Tears of the Kingdom, the stable is actually relocated a little closer to central Hyrule, and rebranded as the new Serene Stable. We can assume this move was made possible due to central Hyrule being a lot safer now thanks to the sealing of Calamity Ganon and removal of guardians that bossed around central Hyrule. It could also be because of how out of the way it was, but at the same time it did serve as a good checkpoint en route to the northwest of Hyrule. We find the former site an empty shell of itself. However, it isn't completely void of life. We find Junie and her soft plush minigame here. We can find her in a few locations across the map, however, she plays a part in the little life of this location nowadays. There is also a construction platform which in terms of the in-game lore indicates there was likely plans to build something else here. Perhaps a small hut or two, a home maybe. We cannot say for certain, but there was definitely something planned but forgotten about, for reasons that we don't need to go into. I'm left with a touch of sad nostalgia visiting here for this video, but at the same time I love seeing this location's more raw, natural beauty. There is no horror story or bloodshed past of this little ghost town, but rather a peaceful rest for what was formerly a bustling stable. Unlike the last location, this next one does indeed contain a bit of a horror story and bloodshed, and is very much a chilling ghost town to visit. Dea Village, found right in between central Hyrule and the Cluda, would have been one of Hyrule's bigger settlements in its prime. It's located by the Dueling Peaks and is tucked within these hills, almost hidden from threats, which is ironically what I believe caused its downfall. So this village was lost in the Great Calamity, and I made a video focused on this place a few years back in which I theorised alongside Bandit Games that the village met a very tragic end as guardians climbed atop the hills and essentially blocked the people of Dea Village for escape and slaughtered them. Not only that, but the village also flooded at some point. It isn't clear if this happened as a result of the calamity directly, or if it was the neglect following the calamity. I myself believe it happened during the calamity, as we can find Dea Lake just beside the village ruins, and I believe that the damage caused by the guardians caused this to burst into the settlement and flood the homes. Regardless of how it came to be flooded, this would have been one of the biggest settlements in Hyrule. The size of it is incredible, and in its prime it even had this massive tree standing tall over it. Dea Village would have been a very scenic place to be with its stunning hills, breathtaking nature, and secluded location. However, it tragically stands as a flooded ghost town in the modern day and age, home to a stone talus and a group of enemies. And also one of these which I didn't know until I was filming this. Tears of the Kingdom expands it slightly from Breath of the Wild, as we can now explore its expansive underground system accessed through the many wells. They even lead to a shrine. This in itself is a neat little bit of lore. An interesting detail to note is that in the depths, the shallow and walkable water above is actually recognised as a wall down here, the same as rivers and large bodies of water. I find this odd, but interesting, as the village likely wasn't always flooded, and even as it is flooded, its shallow. This could just be one of those video game logic things, or maybe there is a reason that I'm not seeing. I just thought it would be interesting to know. There is of course also now a large chasm atop the hills, but other than that, Dea Village remains as one of the largest ghost towns of Hyrule, only second to another settlement we'll be visiting in today's video a little later on. I'll link my theory about the village in the description if you're interested in checking that one out after this. Keeping with the theme of horror stories, our next ghost town can be found on the edges of Death Mountain. Shadow Hamlet was once a small, tucked away settlement only home to a few, but it appears they met a tragic end. I myself have touched on this in old videos, but for a really good deep dive, check out Bandit Game's video on this location. I'll link it below. In Breath of the Wild, we find the burnt remains of this once cozy spot. In Tears of the Kingdom, it is still standing, but remains as unsettling as before. We don't know the exact reason the settlement burned down, however, it's believed that it isn't the obvious answer that you'd probably jump to: Death Mountain's lava. Rather, it has been theorised by Bandit Games that the damage done was actually the work of a lone Wizrobe, who could be found here in Breath of the Wild. The damage doesn't leave the mark of lava flow in my opinion, so I personally believe this theory. Honestly, please do check out his video, as he tells the theory as a tale in incredible fashion. As for Shadow Hamlet now, it stands alone and untouched by the looks of it. We can jump down the well and find a little lava cave with a like and treasure. I hope that in the in-game future of this kingdom, Shadow Hamlet can be repaired and restored for somebody, perhaps a family who want to live in their own little nook of the land. But for now, it remains quiet and untouched, with a dark past. Moving on to a bit of a different ghost town. Well, it isn't really a town, but rather an agricultural settlement. The ranch ruins in central Hyrule are well known for their very similar, and in many spots, one-for-one appearance to Lon Lon Ranch from Ocarina of Time. They are clearly a reference to that location, if not one of the same in lore terms. Being located in central Hyrule, they were never given much of a chance to survive the calamity, and the near-complete demolition shows that. This place would have been stomped on by guardians as the Great Calamity broke out. It stands in peace nowadays. In Breath of the Wild, it becomes home to a few enemies, but nothing too major. Well, other than a guardian. But a few years down the line, and it is once again fairly safe to visit. We managed to get a look at the ranch in its full glory in the Age of Calamity spin-off game. Whilst we can't go inside, we can get a quick look, and it does look lovely. I'm sure this place provided milk and other products for the people of Hyrule back in the day. With the kingdom in the process of restoring and rebuilding now, I'd imagine this location will eventually be restored in this world. We as players might not get to see that, as I'm not sure if this exact iteration of Hyrule will be used again, but speaking in-game lore terms, I think Hyrule will have a central ranch once again very soon. Now for the biggest ghost town found in Hyrule, the one this whole video has been building up to: Castletown. The former heart of Hyrule that was absolutely destroyed during the Great Calamity, and those scars still tear through the beauty of modern day Hyrule. Back in its prime prior to the Great Calamity, this was a very busy and full of life settlement. We've seen glimpses of it through memories, Age of Calamity, and Creating a Champion, and it looked magnificent to explore. Sadly, we didn't get that opportunity, and the restoration project wasn't far enough along by the time the events of Tears of the Kingdom comes along to allow us to explore a restored Castletown. However, the plans are there, and we can see the foundations have been set. Materials are here, and the plan is there to restore the heart of the kingdom, but the task is a massive one, and the upheaval will of course put it on hold. In terms of lore, this place is special and typically always the biggest and most populated settlement. In this day and age, it stands in decimated ruin, and it's truly devastating to see it in such a bad shape, even more so when you consider just how brutal the Great Calamity would have been here. Castletown would have been the first settlement to suffer from the tragedy, as it's right next to the source. The King of Hyrule tells us the tale of the Great Calamity early on in Breath of the Wild, and we get a good look at just how bad Castletown had it. Guardians everywhere, buildings burning down, people being stampeded over, and the ruthless, mindless, malice-infected machines were programmed by Ganon to leave no survivors. Homes destroyed, watchtowers collapsed, cathedrals demolished, and souls stolen from the heartless evil that was plaguing the kingdom. The town also extends to the Castletown prison on the west side and Hyrule Forest Park on the east side, both also suffered from the calamity. It's a sad place to visit, however, it will regain strength with time. With time, Hyrule's broken heart will be mended. Life will return. and that life will never forget what this iconic location once went through. Hyrule Castle may be a ghost town right now, but it will be back. Hyrule will be back. To clarify first and foremost, some of these locations might not have been in use or been as active as they used to be in the exact time frame Princess Zelda experienced. However, they are all at least that far back, if not further back, to the prime of the Zonai. With that said, the first location I'd like to investigate is the Ancient Throne Room, and as an extension to that, the Ancient Castle before the iconic Hyrule Castle we know was built. The Throne Room is the setting of Memory 7, a show of fealty. Ganondorf is seen to accept King Raru's invitation and swears fealty to the first King of Hyrule. However, this parallels Ganondorf's intentions in Ocarina of Time, as this was all false allegiance, part of his plan to take over. The room itself is one long hall. It takes on the very nice Zonai architecture style, suited with many Hylian guards in their Zonai gear, Zonai patterns on the banners, and even some very beautiful glass art on the head window. Speaking of windows, if we take a look outside of this side window, we can actually see the top of the Temple of Time when it was grounded, meaning this throne room isn't far from here. In a different memory focused on Princess Zelda, we can see a building not too far from the Temple of Time. I believe this is where the throne room is, thus making the building we see itself the original Zonai Castle, or whatever you want to call it. Old Hyrule Castle, I guess. Or at least something of that importance. A cool detail to note is that it does look similar to this geoglyph depicting a castle-like building, so it all adds up. And the memory attached to this glyph is Princess Zelda standing just outside where the Shrine of Resurrection would eventually be built, which is right over towards this building. And the fact that Queen Sonia herself says, "Why not come back with us to the castle?" This is all something I didn't pick up when first playing through the game, and it wasn't until I started rewatching memories and breaking them down for this video that I put this together. It seems as though the heart of the kingdom back in the day of the Zonai was the Great Plateau, which makes even more sense as the spiritual king of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild tells us that the Great Plateau is the birthplace of Hyrule. So there you have it. The throne room in this memory, whilst incredibly cool in itself, has a lot more to it when you start looking around. We'll be returning to this area shortly, but for now, let's move on to our next location. The Julian Peaks as we know it are two mountain peaks which meet towards the top. Old legends that were first told in Breath of the Wild say that a very long time ago, a dragon split what was once just one mountain into two, giving the Julian Peaks its fitting name. Now, prior to Tears of the Kingdom, this was harder to believe or prove. However, not only does Tears of the Kingdom contain tons of dragon lore, but it actually gives us a look and proof that the Julian Peaks was once a single mountain. Firstly, we can see on the ancient map of Hyrule found in the Forgotten Temple that the singular peak here is exactly where the Julian Peak lies today, confirming that it was split at some point. We even go on to see it in one of Zelda's memories, as she looks over Hyrule as she's never seen it before. The camera pans around and ends with not the Julian Peaks, but just the peak in the background. It kind of blends in if you're not thinking about it, as it obviously doesn't have its distinctive split down the middle. It's not the most mind-blowing thing about ancient life in Hyrule, but it's cool to think about when the Zonai were at their peak, and even at this point in time, the mountain was nothing like how we know it. Geographical changes to the world over time are pretty neat, I must admit. A very notable operation that took place in the prime of Zonai life was the Construct Factory operation. A grand factory found in the depths that once produced the highly advanced constructs. In Tears of the Kingdom, we visit the still standing factory as a part of Mineru's questline. It's a quiet shell of what it once would have been. only inhabited now by a lonely construct at the top, and through this construct we can learn a little more about how this site operated. It will tell us that the depots are where the parts would come from, and this main structure was the assembly area. Even more interesting, it mentions that the finished product would then be shipped to Dragonhead Island. The massive chain island that forms the shape of a dragon was a part of this operation, and I find that really cool to know. I imagine back in the day, this place was very busy and active. It's honestly quite sad that this lonely construct stays waiting up here, as whilst it recognises the operation has stopped, it's basically waiting here in case it ever starts up again. I'm sorry, buddy. Somewhere I didn't think I'd be talking about when I first started writing this video was the Gerudo Desert. When I knew I wanted to make a video about ancient Hyrule and its life, the barren desert didn't really scream to me. However, it's for that reason I want to bring it up. In Tears of the Kingdom, whilst it took on changes due to the upheaval, they are mostly geographical, such as this large rip into the land or the sinkholes opening up, but there isn't much Zonai work here, and that makes sense given the relationship status we saw between Hyrule and the Gerudo in the ancient past Zelda was sent to. We've seen this sort of disconnect and tension before in Ocarina of Time. That game also tells us of a time where the Gerudo Desert was sort of cut off from the Kingdom of Hyrule. In ancient times, the desert was likely barren, and not too different to how it is now. However, what's interesting is that there is one large sky island above the desert now. It hosts a menacing battle against the fearsome King Gleeok, but as for why it's here, I'm stumped. The Zonai clearly did make some stuff in this area at some point, as there is of course ancient Zonai shrines here, but whilst it likely was just as barren and harsh as it is now, the idea of exploring the desert in ancient times really intrigues me, and I promise that has nothing to do with the absolute baddie Gerudo warriors. Absolutely nothing. Going back to an indoor location, another place in ancient Hyrule that intrigues me is Mineru's study. We see it in two different memories of Princess Zelda's. Firstly, right after that previous memory we looked at, and once again towards the end of Zelda's time in the past. We can safely assume that this room is somewhere within the castle we previously discussed. Firstly, because Zelda headed straight there from the previous memory, but more so visually speaking, it shares the exact same architecture inside. The room itself is filled with books. I can only begin to imagine the sorts of knowledge and wisdom these contain, and who wrote them. Books about Zonai history, culture, and famous figures from their prime. Probably books about Zonai technology and how it all works thanks to Zonai mine deep below. And probably a fanfiction or two. We also see the usage of fans on the wall. I'm no genius, but my Zelda theory brain is telling me that this is air conditioning. The Zonai had air conditioning. If that doesn't scream highly advanced civilization, then I don't know what does. We also see some Zonai equipment, such as this ladder used to reach books. It's the same design-wise as ladders seen in the shrines. Despite the Zonai as a people having nearly died out at this point in time, their work and culture is still very prominent in life. Mineru seems to be the one keeping a hold of a lot of history in this study. She even has her own construct assistant, which is pretty cool. As far as this building, which we can assume is the castle, goes, we can safely assume it is where both the throne room and Mineru's study are found. There very well might be more rooms of significance, but for now, let's move on to somewhere else. Before moving on to the final location of the video, I want to give a mention to the random sky islands dotted around the map. Some of them would have served small but still worthwhile purposes back in the day. Something we see all over the sky map is mining facilities, or equipment. Some are extremely small, others a bit bigger. Many of these do feature one or two small buildings as well. Now, given they are just dotted around and not really in much concentration, we can assume that back in the day the land featured many small mining villages or stations, probably home to just anybody who worked or operated there. Some of these small buildings might not have even been proper homes. more just facilities. For all we know, it was constructs that used them, but it's still cool to know. Another random sky island, or rather islands that I'd like to mention, are the 3 dive ceremony islands. These sites were a big part of Zonai culture back in the day. You can learn this by speaking to one of the constructs beside the large structures. They explained that the dive ceremony is a trial for Zonai youths to show their courage and enter into adulthood. This is really interesting to me, as it's one of the very few pieces of information detailing the life of a Zonai youth, and it's just more culture in general about the Zonai. Now for the final place on the list, and before getting into it, can I quickly ask that if you're enjoying the video thus far, then consider subscribing to the channel for more fabulous and cozy Zelda content. With that said, the most exciting part of ancient Hyrule's life, in my opinion, would have been the life itself. Towns, villages, and settlements that we never saw, the architecture, the regions they were all set in. It's all incredibly fascinating, yet mysterious. There isn't really one specific place in mind, but rather just checking out some of the more settlement-like ruins. Starting off on the Great Sky Island, we find many building ruins, all mostly small buildings, but definitely enough room for a bed or two and some storage. The Temple of Time which is found here was on the Great Plateau back when it was on the surface long ago. We can assume all of these ruins were nearby, if not near one-for-one surrounding. Regardless, this was potentially the largest settlement area of peak Zonai times. We know Hyrule Castle wasn't built until after Ganondorf was sealed by King Rauru, and in that time frame, the Zonai were down to just 2 individuals, meaning Castletown as we've known it over the years wasn't built yet. Whether it's in the sky or on the ground, with the knowledge of the throne room and such being on the Great Plateau already, it's a relatively safe guess to make that these buildings made up the Zonai equivalent of Castletown, and was their largest settlement back in the day. It has the rough layout of a town, different areas for different purposes, nature-dense parts, and of course still being compact enough to create a community. We see some areas that are more dense with multiple buildings in a variety of shapes. These were likely people living next to each other. We don't really see this in the memories, however, at least on the Great Plateau with the angles we got, and Rauru tells us nothing really when we're going around the Great Sky Island. Another location which likely had a settlement of sorts is Dragonhead Island. This stunning location was once a part of the Construct Factory operation, and if you explore the large island chain in full, you'll find a good few building ruins. It's more speculative than others, I must admit, but like the smaller mining villages I mentioned earlier, perhaps some people did live here whilst on the job. And that wraps things up more or less. The ancient life of Hyrule is very likely to remain a big mystery. I am by no means an expert, just a fan who loves the games. We can investigate, speculate, and theorize, which is what I enjoy doing. But will we ever truly know what it was like back when the Zonai were in their prime? On the outskirts of the Hebra region, en route to the Snowfield Stable, we can find the very quiet remains of Tabantha Village, a former settlement on this main path. It wasn't very big in comparison to others, but it did fill this space very well. Life here would have been pretty cold, but enjoyable and manageable. A community likely all very close with each other, wood gatherers to ensure warmth, hunters and foragers to provide food, and possibly a small general shop as well for providing essentials and helping out travellers. A quiet and simple life. Outside of Rito Village, this would have been the only other village in Hebra. As a small passerby settlement, it would have been really helpful for those seeking to explore the beautiful sights the Hebra Mountains have to offer. Travellers probably stopped by here to make final preparations before taking on the mountain climb, as well as staying afterwards to rest up. At the foot of the village, there are a couple of ruined buildings beside this fencing. It's possible that this was where any cattle or livestock the village had was kept, as when you go further up, the houses become a little more dense and closely compact. In this day and age, there is one newly built home just a little further back down the road. It wasn't there in the time frame of Breath of the Wild, so it was built between the two games. When we find it, there are two travellers trapped inside due to a small group of bokoblins having set up camp outside. We can help them and be rewarded with food and some shield surfing knowledge. It's rather small and appears to be more of a public home that anybody can use on their travels. We don't really have much indication as to exactly what happened to Tabantha village. However, given how the calamity went down, we can assume it fell due to the influx of monsters. Guardians didn't really make it this far, at least not in high numbers. I wouldn't rule it out, as even just one lone Guardian could easily destroy a small settlement like this. However, I would say it was more than likely monsters that invaded and destroyed the village. It stands long buried in snow these days, untouched and possibly never to return, as the population is nowhere near what it once was. We can find a Bolson construction site just down the road, but this is as close to rebuilding as it looks to be getting. Sadly, Tabantha village as a whole will likely never return to its full glory. Before leaving Hebra, I'd also like to highlight Pondo's Lodge, a small cabin just over the hill from Tabantha village in fact, which in the time frame of Breath of the Wild, just a few years prior to when Tears of the Kingdom takes place, a man by the name of Pondo ran a snowball bowling minigame here. It was definitely one of the highlights of travelling to and from Hebra. Unfortunately, in the current day, we find it destroyed and half buried in the snow. An old bowling pin can even be found just poking out of the deep snow. Down at the bottom of the hill, where the pins would have been lined up, is now home to a construct camp on a fallen piece of sky debris. It's really sad to see that this former place of joy has fallen due to the effects of Ganondorf's upheaval. Thankfully, Pondo himself did survive. We can find him riding a horse on the nearby main path, which does go through Tabantha village. I'm sure as he passes his former home, he feels a slight sadness, and I don't blame him. In the shallows of the Regencia River, we can find the Sage Temple ruins, a mostly destroyed and mostly unrecognisable temple which back in the day was most likely a place of worship to the ancient sages. Looking at it in its current state, it doesn't appear too big, but when you consider the overall area this covers, when the temple was fully built up, I imagine it was fairly large actually. Now, where these ruins get insanely interesting is the small but lore-packed expansion Tears of the Kingdom made. Due to the effect of the upheaval, caves have opened up across Hyrule, one of which can be found right here at these ruins. Upon jumping down, we can discover that not only does this temple have an underground section, but there is also a stone tablet which reads some very fascinating information. It reads, "A sword was enshrined in this temple to honour the sages. It was moved to Typhlo, north of the Great Forest of Hyrule." This is referring to the Sword of Six Sages, which we can get by completing the questline at Typhlo Ruins. This is a really cool piece of lore to learn, and I was a little jaw-dropped when I read this for the first time. In the past, the Sage Temple was home to the Sword of Six Sages itself, hidden beneath the main temple, which people would visit and worship the sages. We can assume this place was considered a very significant landmark of the kingdom, so perhaps in the future it will be restored to its former glory, but given how things are following Ganondorf's defeat, it might take a little while before getting round to here. The Akkala region is known for how little we first found it with. When we first explored this kingdom, it was well known for its nature and beauty. However, by the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom, it has the likes of Terrytown, the Bolson construction site, and of course the stables. However, there is one massive landmark which stands strong: the Akkala Citadel, the former line of defense against any potential threats coming from the eastern coastline. A multi-layer tower fortress, equipped with cannons, height advantage, army barracks, and the best soldiers Hyrule would have had to offer, settled here. The fact that this place fell completely during the Great Calamity speaks levels to just how brutal the attack was on Hyrule, especially given how far from central Hyrule it is. We don't see much of what it was like back in the day outside of the Age of Calamity spin-off game. The inside was, as you'd expect, large. Unfortunately, in the modern day, all we find inside is a monster-filled cave, and in Breath of the Wild, nothing but a guardian block-up across the broken bridge. Hyrule's finest soldiers stood no chance against the ruthless guardians, and whilst fighting for their kingdom, they were ruthlessly wiped out. The citadel still stands proudly strong today, reminding us of the titan it once was. We can find a few cool things at the top, such as this unique torch design which I haven't seen anywhere else, as well as a secret cave which leads to some hidden treasure. Just be careful if you venture up here, as there is a gloom spawn lurking around. On one of the lower levels, we also now find a fierce thunder gleeok, which is not to be messed with. Mabe Village is probably the ghost town on this list which suffered the most terrifying demolition. Located in central Hyrule just down the road from Castletown, this unfortunate settlement would have felt the brute force of the calamity very quickly. A mostly stone-made village, this one appears different in design to most towns and villages seen across the kingdom. It takes on an appearance a lot more similar to the outpost ruins we see across Hyrule. What this could mean is that it was possibly a working village, perhaps for mining in this nearby rock, or maybe metalwork such as blacksmithing or forging parts for various projects. It's also right next to the ranch ruins which we covered in a previous Ghost Towns video. Perhaps this whole area was one big working settlement. Now, what's interesting is that the depiction of Mabe Village pre-Calamity in the Age of Calamity spin-off isn't as stone heavy as we see in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. This is most likely just video game logic, as Age of Calamity was made by third-party developers. Regardless of design, I personally believe this area was full of workers given the location. It's hard to say, as little is truly known. The ruins are rather peaceful to walk through nowadays, aside from a few bokoblins wandering around, but the horror stories these ruins could tell must be horrifying. It would have been terrifying to witness the onrushing guardians coming your way with nowhere to run or hide. Those of Mabe Village likely didn't suffer for long, but that doesn't take away from the horror they went through. A village which often goes unmentioned in these sorts of lists is Gaponga Village, a unique settlement built around the shallows of the Lanayru wetlands. It's primarily set on one large main island, but does have extended areas on the surrounding islands. Unfortunately, the calamity completely destroyed Gaponga Village too. There is little left to really tell us about the village. It appeared rather large, probably around a similar size to Tabantha Village, or maybe pushing up towards Dea Village. A nicely populated settlement on a popular route for travellers. Like many locations on this list, this ghost town is featured in Age of Calamity. It appears as most highly built settlements do, but a very interesting detail we can learn is that it appeared to have Zora influence. Given its location being right next to a river, and just down the road from Zora's domain, this makes a lot of sense. It's quite likely that Gaponga Village was a fishing village, or at least had a focus on fishing for their living. In today's Hyrule, there are quite a few monsters surrounding the ruins. However, it is actually somewhat safe to travel through, as we can see the odd traveller walking through the middle. If you hop down the village well, you can find a book with some rather interesting text regarding climbing. I wonder who wrote this. It's unfortunate that Gaponga Village fell, as I can only imagine how much I personally would have loved this place full of life. I really enjoy any aspects of fishing and the aquatic life in Zelda games, and I probably would have ended up spending a lot of time here if it had survived, or had even been restored by the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom. However, it unfortunately stands quiet as yet another ghost town in Hyrule. One of the most iconic and well-known ruins in this kingdom of Hyrule is the Temple of Time and its surrounding area. This is the first major landmark we saw in this world. Back in Breath of the Wild, when Link exited the Shrine of Resurrection, we learnt that the kingdom had been completely destroyed. And our first example of this is the Temple of Time. It stands half destroyed, with a haunting wind blowing through its holes, but yet lays peacefully as nature is taken over. Pre-Calamity, the temple would have been a place of worship to the goddess Hylia. People from far and wide across Hyrule would have travelled to the Great Plateau to be here. It would have been the home of this belief back in the day. Looking at past versions of the temple, we can only imagine just how beautiful this would have been in its prime. Now, the way in which it fell appears to be rather brutal. Guardians that flooded out from Hyrule Castle and rapidly throughout central Hyrule reached here and made easy work of a grand piece of architecture, including the smaller buildings in front of the temple, which also are believed to have been for some form of worship to the golden goddesses. Each of these 3 smaller ruined buildings have the symbol of each goddess: Din, Nehru, and Furore. We can't say for sure, but perhaps when people visited here, they would pray to each of the golden goddesses first, and work their way up to the goddess Hylia statue, and pray there at the end. There is so much we don't know about the birthplace of Hyrule, the Great Plateau. Fun fact about that, prior to Tears of the Kingdom releasing, there was a lot of confusion around why this place was considered the birthplace of Hyrule, as said by the late King Rome. Tears of the Kingdom reveals the backstory, and that this is where the original Temple of Time, Castle, and King and Queen of Hyrule were located. It all makes sense now. The Temple of Time stands as one of the most notable ghost towns and ruins across the entire kingdom, standing tall and engulfed by nature, home to a few bokoblins these days, and with no signs of a restoration project coming anytime soon. Starting in the nearby northwest of Hyrule in Rowan Plain, we can find multiple ruined buildings across this large field. What appears to have once been homes, now ruins. They're all a little isolated, standing still on their own, just sharing the large plain. Prior to the Great Calamity of a little over 100 years ago now, these homes would have been peaceful little places for people to live. The location isn't exactly in a busy place. There was once upon a time a stable just beside them. However, the Serene Stable, now the new Serene Stable, relocated a little more centrally down the main path which flows through here, leaving this empty ring of trees for us to pass by. I'm a bit of a speculator and would guess that these small isolated homes across the field were inhabited by 1 or 2 people at most. Couples or individuals living a quiet life. To be quite frank, that thought makes me a little jealous. There is also a chance there was at some point in time a little bit of agriculture or general farming done in this area. We find the odd fencing dotted around, which looks similar to that used in the fencing to contain animals, potentially also crops. We really cannot say if this was ever considered a settlement, and I doubt it was due to how spread out things are. However, there are settlement features such as a couple of wells in the area to provide water. We can also find the Marita Exchange ruins further down the path near that previously mentioned ring of trees. Perhaps before the Calamity wiped out these homes, there was a lot more people passing by. Unfortunately, like many small settlements and locations, these homes of Rowan Plain were destroyed, and although there is a Bolson construction site in the area, it's unlikely this location will return to its previous small population anytime soon. Moving a bit further south takes us to Lake Illumini, a very quiet and tucked away lake surrounded by immense amounts of nature. It's a very beautiful location in itself, and it actually happens to also be a former home. Right next to the small lake, we can find 3 very closely packed buildings, with another just round the corner. They're built within the trees and it creates a really nice vibe. We can also find this little shelter by the lake, which was probably used for some sort of, you know, shelter. The thing I find fascinating about these unmarked ruins is how out of the way and hidden they are. Lake Illumini is a really tucked away location not connected to any main paths. In fact, the nearest one is all the way over here on the map. So whoever lived here lived a very quiet and peaceful life. Once again, I am jealous. The general location has a wonderful mix of grassy fields, forest trees, and lively wildlife. It's such a raw place to be. Whoever lived here might have had some sort of environmental focused job. Now, of course we don't know the ins and outs of Hylian work life, but it's safe to assume that there were a wide variety of jobs and roles outside of the commonly seen farmers, knights, and shop owners. Perhaps whoever lived here tended to the wildlife and nature. Maybe they foraged and sold their hauls at the market. It's all highly speculative, but that's part of the fun for me. Given there are 3 buildings here, and one just beside them, I imagine a family lived here, with these 3 being the main home, and this building here being more of a shed, or something for storage. It's really sad that this unmarked ruin fell, as considering how out of the way it is, it's surprising the effects of the Great Calamity actually got to it, whether that was guardians or monsters. It's upsetting to know that such a beautiful place has fallen into ruin. If you're like me and enjoy just exploring the Kingdom of Hyrule, I'd highly recommend coming here and checking out the area. Just be careful, as there is currently a Lionel just up the hill. Switching sides of the kingdom, we look to the eastern shoreline by Tarn Point. A rather mysterious unmarked ruin can be found here. These pillars stand tall at the point by the seaside, as well as a cave below which expands the ruins and opens up even more questions as to what these ruins are. We don't find much around them, well, other than a little Korok. Drop a wee like down below for the little Korok folks. Anyway, why are these specific ruins found here, but not marked as anything? They look very significant. Why can they be found underground surrounding a Zonai shrine? It's a little odd, and admittedly different from the other unmarked ruins already discussed, but this just caught my eye, as the design of these ruins are, like I said, fairly significant. We see the same design in other locations such as the ancient columns, as well as very closely appearing like the stone found in the springs. Those locations are fairly significant, and rightfully marked as something despite being in ruin. So why is this one just nothing? We can find something similar a little further north, right here in the Akala region as well. It's also completely unmarked and unexplained. In the previous game Breath of the Wild, there was a Sheikah ball placed here as part of a shrine quest, so not too different to how these ruins surround a little puzzle to get to this Zonai shrine. Is there perhaps a connection with the shrines in these ruins? Maybe, but we cannot say that for sure. It's an odd unmarked ruin. The underground section does extend throughout the entire cave and looks a little all over the place in certain areas. Maybe there was once a much larger structure here, spanning across this entire area, above and below. But time has not been so kind to it. What was this structure of the past, now lost and half collapsed into the ground? Not too far from Hyrule Castle itself lies a set of ruins, now unmarked in Tears of the Kingdom. Bare and empty, but yet mysterious as what was this once fairly large structure. I say now unmarked, as they were actually marked in Breath of the Wild. The ancient lab ruins can be found right here on the map, and span out across a fair bit of land. As I said, they were previously a marked ruin, but seem to have lost that identity a few years down the line in this game, Tears of the Kingdom. I wanted to include this location as I find it a little odd that the name was removed from the map. Why is this? Well, it could be that perhaps the knowledge of what these ruins once were has actually faded out of memory. Or at least to enough people that it's just not known now. Whilst that's a really cool piece of world development if so, it is a little sad to know that it's fading from memory. We do get a brief look at this place in its prime through the Age of Calamity spin-off. The structure had a large central area and then a wide border around it, all lit with the special blue flame that powers Sheikah tech. It's always a shame to see the results of what the Great Calamity did, and it's just that little bit more sad here, knowing the name of this place may be fading from memory. Our final location for today's video takes us to the Poplar Foothills, an easy to miss crevice tucked into the cliffside that surrounds Dea Village and Lake. Up here we can find the remains of two homes, a carriage half buried into the ground, and a well. First of all, what's a carriage doing up here? Second of all, there is no name for this place. It doesn't appear to be part of Dea Village, as it's not connected in any way. In fact, this little nook is quite inaccessible. Even in Breath of the Wild, there was no names or hints around what this little area was. Well, we can assume it was home for somebody, probably multiple people given there are two buildings, but I can't wrap my head around how this was accessed. I suppose that could just be left down to a good old bit of video game logic, but it still bothers me. An interesting thing to consider here is that due to the effects of the upheaval, a cave is opened up right next to these ruins. Even more interesting, the cave contains Zonai ruins. It isn't just a regular cave. Could there perhaps be some sort of connection here? I honestly cannot think of any other reason to have a house in this odd spot. But then again, I bet it would be nice being so away from everybody. For the third time in this video, I am jealous. Why did I do this to myself? If you explore beneath the well up here, you can find one of those mysterious cooking journals, but not much more. Off towards the edge, there is also a Korok looking to be reunited with his friend. Hi buddy. But aside from all of that, I am lost as to what this little location was. I suppose it could be considered part of Dea Village, but it's not really part of it if you ask me. It's just up here with no way to access it other than climbing or dropping down, which just isn't practical. It's unmarked, now in complete ruin, and we're left with no answers. The first mysterious ruin I'd like to visit today can be found not far from Heiteno Village. A little down the road through Midla Woods and up the Furley Plateau on the high cliffside, there's an old, mostly crumbled into pieces, mysterious building here. It shares the architectural style of the Hylian outposts found all over the kingdom. Grey stonework with little Hylian symbols engraved into the walls, pillars, archway entrances, and compact spaces on the inside. These ruins aren't marked as anything, and understandably so, as they are rather small and you'd assume insignificant as you walk by, and potentially don't even notice them, but they interest me enough to have a look. In this day and age, we can find the sign of a camper or traveller who must have stayed the night here. Heiteno is just down the road, but sure, it seems nice here too. So what was this wee ruin back in its day? Well, going off the design and style, I would have to assume it was something similar to the outposts. So presumably inhabited by Knights of Hyrule or somebody working for the royal family. Given its position of height and viewpoint over Heiteno Village and the pathways leading up to it, it's possible that this was once some sort of outpost or guard watch area, keeping an eye on anybody trying to sneak in something they shouldn't, or be doing something they shouldn't. Especially with the ruins down the hill, which we may or may not be talking about later in the video. It's also possible that it was more of a security checkpoint for anybody travelling up this higher pathway. Maybe this was a delivery route and guards checked and or inspected incoming deliveries to Heiteno Village. It's hard to say for absolute sure, but going off the location and design, it surely had to be something along these lines. A cool feature I really want to point out is that going outside through the back entrance leads you to this really pretty waterfall and pond, perhaps a quiet space for guards on their break. Oh, and hello there, Lil Korok. So cute. As for how this ruin came to be, I don't think the Great Calamity would have done much damage. At least not to this extent, as we know the onrushing Guardians didn't make it this far. Whilst monsters did and have set up camps nearby, I don't think they did this either. At least not fully. They are equipped with explosives, so it's entirely possible I suppose, but I think the main reason it looks so broken down is just due to time. Over time, and not being tended to anymore, it fell into decay, and now ruin. Monsters have come and gone. Travellers stayed and left. To many, this is probably just an insignificant little ruin, but to me, it hides stories which are unseen to us, and that is really fascinating to think about. On the outskirts of the Death Mountain area, we can find a few random ruins dotted around, some marked, others not. One in particular, which is rather small and unmarked, is this little mysterious nook between the rocky terrain containing 6 small buildings, or rather the remains of buildings. A quiet little pass on the route, just down the road from the woodland stable and a former settlement pre-calamity, Raru Settlement Ruins. We find what I'm calling Tribly Ruins, a presumably passerby settlement on the route towards both the path up Death Mountain and the path taking you to Zora's Domain. The 6 buildings lay near fully destroyed. We can assume this is the result of the Great Calamity, as unfortunately Guardians did make it this far, as well as the large influx of monsters that terrorized the kingdom during that awful period. I'm not 100% set on these necessarily being homes. I'm not ruling it out, but given there was a settlement just down the road, I'm open to the possibility that perhaps these were shops or trading buildings. But hey, that could just be my imagination running free. Perhaps it was some small homes, and or a shop or two, somewhere that sells remedies and items to aid in the journey up the daunting and hot Death Mountain Trail. Those that lived and or worked in this little nook probably worked either by the Hylia River just round the corner for fish, or worked with the rock coming from Death Mountain, perhaps mining gems and goods. It's a very small unmarked ruin, and probably one of those that genuinely wasn't all that much back in its prime. But regardless, these homes and livelihoods of those that once inhabited them were ripped away by the devastating calamity. It's quiet, but not too far away from the larger civilization. This area would have been lovely back in the day. It's unlikely we'll see it repaired anytime soon. If anything, it'll probably be demolished and forgotten in time. A sad, but likely possibility. Moving over to the eastern coast of Hyrule, in the shadows between Zora's Domain and Mount Lanayru, we can find Samasa Plain and some mysteriously unmarked ruins. Located just next to a large Skull Tower monster camp, these ruins share a key feature to somewhere we visited earlier by Heiteno Village. These ruins are the same grey, outpost style, the same architecture and rough layout, but on a larger scale. The actual location of these ruins are a bit out of the way. It isn't necessarily difficult to reach, but it isn't connected to any main paths or even dirt trails going off the main. It's manageable, but it's not somewhere people seem to have visited or passed by on their travels. This hints at what these specific ruins were possibly once for. Looking at the general setting, these ruins are next to this entrance point on the eastern coastline. Something else we know regarding the coastline is that there was once a large watch point to guard and defend against potential invaders, but also presumably anyone new to Hyrule, just to ensure they aren't a threat to the kingdom. This place was the Akala Citadel, and it covered the northern face of the coastline. So what I'm thinking is that this little ruin here could have been a smaller sort of security, defense outpost for anyone travelling into Hyrule from the sea. Lanayru Bay could have been a very tactically good area to try and sneak in if threats wanted to, or even non-threats just looking to enter the kingdom to trade or settle. This ruin might have acted as something to handle that. That would be the duty of the Knights of Hyrule, and as mentioned, these ruins do share that style in architecture. They also appear to have been a lot bigger back in their day. Whilst what we see is this section here, and a little room up on this hill, the full extent of these ruins spans all the way back to where the enemy campsite is. This means that when this place was fully operational, it extended throughout this entire area to some degree, perhaps a mix of open areas and indoor. There's also the possibility it acted as an exchange ruin. We see other exchange ruins in Hyrule, such as the Marita exchange ruins towards Hebra in the west of Hyrule. There is a chance this space was used for simply just defense, welcoming, and trade. There's also a fair chance it was occupied by a mix of Hylian and Zora guards due to how close this is to Zora's domain, but also how fantastic the Zora are in the water. That's why I imagine these ruins once were, probably somewhere that guards would have stayed at for short periods of time, and then went home for extended periods of time to rest. The route is a little rocky, but there is also the option of sailing down the Ratala River to reach Kaponga Village. Whether this place fell purely due to the calamity or a mix of that and neglect, it's unclear. What is clear is that monsters now call this unmarked location home, and given the current condition of the kingdom, whilst on the up, it's unlikely that this will be fixed up anytime soon. Returning to the surrounding area of Heiteno Village. This next mysterious ruin, which is surprisingly unmarked in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, can be found just down the hill from Heiteno Village. This little circuit, or ring around the trees, contains a few different ruins which appear to make up whatever this little area was. From a waterlogged building by the pond, to a main building in the centre, fencing all around, and little bits and pieces dotted all over. Oh, and of course a still intact hut with some old pots and a bed. There are a few different things that spring to mind when I think about this little circuit. The first, and one I think many players think of, is that it's very fun to ride around on horseback. That's why I dub it the Heiteno Circuit. Once again, we see this familiar grey stone design. Yes, it is copy and pasted around the kingdom a lot, but for good reason. There once was a lot of these little and large buildings set up all across Hyrule. Paired with the dotted around ruins by the pond and up on the hill, along with the fact this is on the direct route to Heiteno Village, I imagine this little area was some sort of trading hub, both for travellers coming to Heiteno, but also those who live in the village and come down to sell their goods. Heiteno has a few different crop patches and a farm with cattle, so it's very likely that the produce from here wasn't brought all the way to central Hyrule and beyond directly, but rather sold here and delivered by merchants. This also goes for goods and materials such as wood, metal, weapons, tools, and so on. Maybe a cheeky wee Midna body pillow? Who said that? Who said that? Not me. Anyway, I feel like that is most likely what this little circuit was for, especially given the great distance Heiteno Village is from central Hyrule and every other major settlement across the kingdom. I imagine there were also some guards here, but on a much smaller scale than the security focus outpost, such as the one above here, that we discussed earlier. It's been out of commission for some time now by the looks of it. Mostly due to neglect, as the Great Calamity didn't quite hit Heiteno. However, the results of the monster influx might have also affected its fall off and decay. Perhaps in the near future, as things get back on track in terms of fixing the kingdom up, this little ruin will be repaired and back in use. The last mysterious unmarked ruins I'd like to visit and explore in today's video can be found in central Hyrule. Funny that, because you'd think those are the easiest and most known ones to cover, and for the most part you'd be entirely correct. However, I somehow passed by these ruins by South Nabi Lake, Nabi Ruins as I'm dubbing them, and they intrigue me highly. There are only a few homes here, and now a gloom-coated well. Not much. So why have I chose to include this one? Well, for one, because it's unmarked, and that's the focus today. but also because of how peaceful and cute this must have been back in the day. It would have undoubtedly been wiped out during the Great Calamity, and probably in very brutal fashion, as this plain here is connected to the pathway along the Julian Peaks, a place where many Guardians flooded to whilst chasing down Link in Princess Zelda. Those that lived here, whether home or not at the time, would have had their homes destroyed in moments. Anybody here in these dire hours, gone in moments. Who lived here? What was life in this open spot like? It was just ripped away from them. It's just so quiet and beautiful, but yet gone. The south lake just beside it also has a little ruined piece over here. Perhaps whoever lived here tended to this lake or fished here. The well that is now covered in gloom drops down to the depths, and if you follow the jump down, you'll find the water as well as some old buckets, the remains of what once was. I can't really explain why I feel so passionate about these particular ruins. Maybe it's the elegance and destruction that they've left behind. Maybe it's knowing that such a small ruin definitely holds hundreds of stories and memories for those who lived here. That kinda goes for the entire kingdom, to be honest. Despite being near enough destroyed by the Great Calamity of 100 years ago, the scars left on Hyrule's graceful body are so beautiful. Thanks very much for checking out this marathon compilation of my World Lore content from 2023. I hope you enjoyed watching and or rewatching. If you could do me a massive favour by dropping a wee like down below and subscribing if you're new, that'd be very much appreciated. Big thanks and shout out to all of my channel supporters for financially backing the channel and being a massive part of making these videos possible. If you'd like to join them and become a channel supporter today, then check out the supporting links below. Hop in the Discord server if you haven't already, follow my Twitter for updates and banger tweets, and of course, I wish you all a lovely rest of your day or night. And until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.